Right.
Hello, and welcome to this most recent episode of the Akkad and Koka Reports. Today we have a very important guest, Dr. Venkatesh, who is in Bangalore right now. He is head of cardiology at the Aster Hospital in Bangalore, and he has very graciously agreed to come on to talk about what's going on with COVID in India. From the thick of it. So incredibly gracious to have him do this when he's dealing with so much. So thank you for coming on.
Good to be back. And as I said, it's a tough time over here. But then I think it's always a pleasure to talk to you because you dissect out things very well and look at it. It helps us to put things in a perspective for ourselves as well.
So tell me, Venkatesh, how are you doing with all of this?
Well, luckily, personally, and within the family, we are okay with the immediate family. You know that last year my mom was affected with COVID, but she recovered. And after that, there have been no surprises. We all got vaccinated. And after that, there has been no let up with work and all that. So that's been a good part. But then what's going on here is a lot of our friends, family members who are not the immediate family, then a lot of patients with whom you're attached because you have been practicing for some time. There's a lot of chaos out there because the infection is spreading fast and people looking for advice, beds, ICU beds, oxygen. It's kind of disturbing. The healthcare workers are really emotionally disturbed because we are dealing with a situation which is kind of unprecedented. It's slightly worse than what we saw last year in 2020. So that's been there. Personally, I think I should thank Providence that so far we have been good. And I continue to go to the hospital and we still take care of patients. Today, I did an angioplasty for a patient with the COVID myocardial infarction. So I think work goes on, but then this is what is going on here.
So can you give me a sense of what you think, or give us a timeline? Now, obviously, COVID was in India, about 9 months ago or so, or when was it in Bangalore? And is it in again? Forgive me. It's hard to kind of make sense of certainly of the news coming out now because it seems to be everywhere right now in India. When did it initially hit India? I remember that when Prime Minister Modi, asked for the shutdown to save India, etc. That was in April, May, or something like that last year, correct? But that was only 500 cases or so at the time. After that, describe for me in Bangalore when it was bad last and kind of what the timeline was in terms of when it started getting bad most recently.
Well, the first cases in India were in late January 2020, but there were a few people who had traveled back from China. And after that, for a while, there was a lull. And as you rightly said, March is the time, end of March is the time when we started seeing cases. And then it really blew out of proportion in April, kind of gradually went up. We saw a peak in September, October, a lot of patients, situation where we were running out of beds, ICU beds especially, fair number of deaths. And then somehow by November, things started getting better. When I say the things started getting better, it's largely about Bangalore, but then except few pockets in India, Mumbai and Delhi, things were kind of simmering down till about December. One of the fears we all had was this end of December, the Christmas, New Year celebrations, which is, people take to streets and celebrate. We thought that is going to lead to a surge in cases in January, first week, second week, but that didn't seem to happen. Things were really very encouraging towards in whole of January. I think end of January, there were some indications that the case numbers are going to go up in cities like Bangalore. And by the beginning of this month, in April, these are the cases have really gone up. Now, in all of India, the everyday cases, the newly detected cases, about 350,000, and it appears that some predictions are there that we might hit a daily positive cases of about 500,000 by first week of May. There's some hope that it will peak around that time, and like how we had a first wave that over about 3 or 4 months things start settling down, and there's a downturn. There is also some hope, because unlike last time when we didn't know where we were going at all, here we have two indicators. One is that we have successfully tided over the first, with fair bit of success, tided over the first wave. And secondly, I think we seem to be following the UK by about 3 months or so. And we have seen that there was, the Christmas opening up, and then there was a second wave. And now with a prolonged lockdown, there is now, some talk about them opening up in the next month. In my own state, the state of Karnataka, where Bangalore is located, the chief minister just announced a 14-day lockdown. There were some restrictions in place for the last week or so. Now we have actually we have been hit with a lockdown for the next 2 weeks. So I think the government is taking some measures. I think this is where we are. We are going to probably peak somewhere in the first or second week of May, between 350, 400,000 or 500,000 cases a day, a new diagnosis in all of India. So that is where we are today.
Wow, it's unbelievable, the number of cases. What do you think that? No, first of all, is this happening pretty much all throughout India, or are there hotspots? I mean, Delhi is obviously very hot. Where you are is very hot. Are there places that this is not happening?
Well, actually, in Maharashtra, that is Mumbai and some of the bigger towns in Maharashtra, and in Delhi, the first wave really never faded, and the second wave kind of took off. So there was hardly a let up over there. There was, I think, few weeks when people started seeing some reduction in number of cases. But in the rest of the country, there was actually a turn down of cases. So the cases became less, and everybody was very optimistic. A lot of things were attributed to for how the caseload came down. The innate immunity of the country, a lot of the weather, the variant, and all those things. But then, except few pockets, there was actually a reduction in number of cases. Now the increase in cases is mainly in the metros. Cities like Hyderabad, Mumbai and Delhi obviously are there, Pune, and then Bangalore. These are some of the metros where it is coming up. But what we are now fearing is that this might spread into the rural areas, the tier 3 cities, the villages, the hinterland, that kind of area. So we are a little worried about that, because there is the country is very porous, and it's not very easy. There are migrant laborers who go from cities to villages, and there are political rallies, religious gatherings where people come from the rural areas into hotspots, and these are super spreader events, and that will take the infection far and wide. So I think now, when the infection really spreads this time, unlike 2020, it may be going beyond the cities alone.
So what? Let me see. What do you think? What do you think happened? Why was there such a lull for so long? Was that because of, and why is there this kind of meteoric rise that's been seen? What are your?
I think we kind of let our guard down. By end of December, I think that there is some data to support this, that about 60% of the population, at least the urban population which was tested, had some immunity against COVID. And because of that, there was a rapid decline in number of cases. With that, there was this sense that we have, gotten on top of this pandemic. Unfortunately, what happened, I think, was people just let their guards down. When they went out, unlike in Europe, and I'm sure that happens in the United States as well, that when the opening up of the economy happens, there are still restrictions that you can't, you still have takeouts, you still can't have large gatherings. I know from UK, where when it was opened up, only 4 people could go as a group into a restaurant. A wedding gathering could only have 50 people. These are unheard of restrictions in India. When it opened up, it was everything was jam-packed, and people just gathered together. And also, I think we all let up on our basic precautions of wearing masks. I know that there are people who don't believe in them, but I think they do work. People didn't wear masks, or they just carried their masks around their chins, or they didn't really socially distance themselves. There were a lot of jostling around and that kind of a thing. And at that time, it is now documented that there was a new mutant. They say that there is now a triple mutant. So I don't know what really it means. I'm just a cardiologist, but the point is that I think there is a new mutant which may have not been kind of controlled by the innate immunity, with herd immunity, which the people had developed. So I think, given these 2 factors, that we let our guard down and there was a new mutant, the cases spread. The difference which we see on ground, I mean, again, as I spoke to you before this meeting, I told you that I'm not in the I'm not looking at the epidemiology of COVID in India, but as a doctor who is treating patients with COVID, and also working in Bangalore, where a lot of cases are there, I can tell you that unlike last time, this time the spread seems to be more insidious, coming from more asymptomatic patients. We now see that within a family, more people are affected. I have seen that a family of 10, all of them getting infected, unlike last time where a few of the family members were infected. So I believe the new variant must be a little more spready, and then that's why the meteoric rise in number of cases. We are also testing more. That's I think has to be taken into account. Last year around this time, we were doing far few number of tests. We are doing many more tests now. Therefore, I think the number of positive cases are also high. That's I think these are the 3 reasons. One is we are testing more. I think we let our guard down, and I think there is a new mutant strain of this, the initial Wuhan strain of virus, which I think is causing the problem.
What in terms of on the ground, in terms of how many patients you're seeing in where you are in your hospitals, with your hospital and the hospitals around you, this is in terms of the scale of this versus what you faced in that August, that time when India had its last peak. What's the difference, would you say?
See, when the peak occurred last year in Bangalore, I think the peak numbers were in Bangalore itself, 9,000 new cases a day. Now we are at 27,000 new cases a day. And I think today's was 29,000. So that's the scale, and we are not even at the peak. We expect that we are going to peak in between 1st and maybe 7th, or I hope not by May 15th, which means that we may be looking at something like 35,000 new cases in a day. So it's a huge difference between the case numbers compared to last year. And also, what has happened now, like last year, this situation came. We were hit by COVID really in April, and by September we were talking about stopping non-COVID work, or maybe August we were talking about stopping non-COVID work, reserving most of our beds for COVID and all that. But now our numbers started rising maybe at the beginning of this month or late last month. We already have directives from the government that elective work has to, it's not been banned, but it has to be very judiciously used, and most of our beds have to be reserved for COVID. So that has come. So I think we are hit harder this time in terms of numbers.
Do you have are there beds that are available in Bangalore, or what's the situation right now? In if somebody were to get very sick, what happens?
That's been the pain point nowadays. We have in Bangalore maybe around somewhere around 600 to 700 total number of ICU beds. Um, Now it looks like that we are in a logjam situation. There is hardly an ICU bed today. There are a lot of patients who are unable to find beds with oxygen. There are a lot of patients who are unable to get ICU beds. I think the authorities are trying their best, but this is worse than the last time. We have lost a lot of patients who were not able to make it to the hospital. There are people who went to the hospital and could not get into the hospital because there were no beds with oxygen or ICU beds, and they were turned back. So quite a lot of problems have happened because the healthcare system is definitely overwhelmed.
So,
Right now.
so patients are. You're pretty confident that patients are dying in a significant number simply because they're unable to access healthcare.
Certainly. I mean, there is also news that the numbers are underreported. That may be true. It may not be intentionally underreported or anything, because some people simply don't make it. There are many patients who have severe symptoms. They died even before the tests were done, so they couldn't be classified as COVID deaths. So these kind of things have happened. There are people who have. This time we saw a lot of them that symptoms are there. The CT scan findings are there, but the tests, both the RT-PCR and then we have some rapid antigen tests and gene expert, etc., they have turned negative. So I think it's difficult to classify them. So there is definitely there is definitely a significant number of people dying because of lack of beds as well. Not only inside the ICUs, so even before they reach, or because they were unable to reach a facility. I think that's happening.
In terms of what we can do for these patients in the hospital, the major thing, of course, is to take somebody who's very, very hypoxic and put them on oxygen, correct? And the other thing is, of course, once they're advanced to the point that they can't breathe on their own, is put them on a ventilator. I don't know how much experience or what you have in terms of talking to the folks around you, but do you how many, is there an issue with oxygen in your hospital and other hospitals?
The bigger hospitals in Bangalore, the oxygen shortage, which has been kind of
Yeah.
making rounds in the country, is not really there. I think it's mainly in smaller hospitals, which there are, I think, supply issues. The procurement of oxygen plants, oxygen concentrators, and have been an issue, and I think these have been addressed. But from the last year, there is fair bit of experience of treating patients. If somebody is hypoxic, to put them on an oxygen bed and to kind of take them into the ICU, prone them, do different techniques of ventilation, get them out. I think the success of, at least treating successfully patients who are critically ill in our ICUs are, I think, comparable to anywhere in the world. And I work in a tertiary care hospital, and we have had some very impressive figures of how patients turned out, even when they were, say, prolonged ventilatory support, etc. Of course, we lost many, but then I think it was a fair bit of success story. And we now, in the whole of this country, wherever ICUs are there, I think physicians are now well trained to deal with these patients. So it's basically simply an issue of logistics. When patients come to your ER, if all the ER cubicles which can give you an oxygen outlet are full, you can't take any more. And the question of accommodating them inside the hospital where piped in oxygen is available only will arise if the beds are vacant. And then once and we know that there are more number of ward beds than the ICU. For instance, in my hospital there are 65 ward beds with COVID patients today, and we have 22 ICU beds. 17 of those patients are on a ventilator. Now, we do have space for a few more, but if many of these 65 patients crash in the ward, we may not be able to pull them up into the ICU. So this kind of issue is there. There are a lot of hospitals which don't even accept patients with a pulse oximetric saturation of less than 85%, because they fear that if they take these patients and if they crash, their ICUs are already clogged. So I think the issue is of logistics. Oxygen supply, I think, is an issue in some parts of the country. In South India, possibly it may not be a big problem, because I think there are enough number of oxygen plants in South India. So Bangalore, I have not heard from any of my colleagues who work in other hospitals or even in smaller hospitals that there have been severe shortages. There have been momentary, kind of few hours, the oxygen is about to run out and patients were sent to other hospitals, were there for a few days ago. But in the last couple of days, I have not heard this. These stories are mainly emanating from the northern part of the country where I think there was shortage. But now I think the government of India has made efforts. I think some cryo plants as well as oxygen concentrators have been airlifted from various parts of the world, Singapore and United States, Germany. I think they have contributed for this crisis. I think because of that, this oxygen situation is likely to be addressed quickly. But I think the main problem will be the number of beds. If this surge continues to happen, even assuming that 1% of the patients who are affected require hospitalization, to find those beds, ICUs, oxygen beds, and also to have these manned by doctors and paramedics, nurses especially. I think these are going to be the challenge which we are going to see in the next few days, because the doctors and nurses who are working in the COVID areas are already kind of working at their peak capacity. A lot of them are turning positive, which means they're off for a couple of weeks. So with all that, I think manpower is going to be a big challenge in the coming 2 weeks.
Manpower, from the manpower standpoint, is it the case? I've talked to some people in India, and it seems like many of the healthcare professionals I've spoken to have been vaccinated. Is that correct?
That's been a good part in this whole thing, because the first time that 2020 pandemic which hit us, we had a lot of reports of doctors becoming critically ill, nurses becoming critically ill, doctors more than nurses, because I think the age group issue is there. And we lost a lot more doctors and senior medical professionals last time. This time we did have some, but very few doctors got into ICUs, became critically ill. These stories are very few now. I think the healthcare workers got professionals got vaccinated. I think that's been a good part. Most of the doctors, majority of the nurses and other paramedics have got vaccinated. I think that has protected us some. So in that sense, we have. But then these doctors and nurses are working on more than one shift. They are working in the same place. There is physical exhaustion. There is a lot of emotional exhaustion. I suppose this is all going to be an issue going forward, if there are more numbers, turning back patients, declaring them dead, or even refusing on telephones, saying that, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I think it's going to take a big emotional toll as well.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine what it is. The healthcare workers in India going through. The scale in India is just so much. It's just not comprehensible by most people in the
Is
US,
it
right?
something like what you had in New York last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, again, I'm not in New York, but from the reports from very close friends and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's that 2 week period of time when you just feel completely, the folks who are talking to me. We had Daniel Jafari on to talk, who was an ER physician in one of the hardest hit hospitals in New York City, and he was obviously right in the center of things. And yeah, I mean, that emotional toll is just massive to go through. All I can say to my colleagues in India and you is that it does end at some point. But my goodness, it's such a tough thing to deal with, certainly mentally, with all the stress of and again, of course, the other part of the stress of the first wave was that there was so much uncertainty about what would happen to you, right? I mean, are you going? No, so when we talked to Daniel, so the bravery on the healthcare workers part, certainly in the first wave, unvaccinated and stuff, and that's that other emotional toll. So anyway, hopefully that I hope for everyone's sake that this thing peaks soon. um
Another small point when it comes to healthcare workers, like I have to go into the COVID ICU to see patients.
yeah,
Some of them have cardiac issues. What I have seen is, I think there is a lot more confidence in the healthcare worker professionals in dealing with COVID,
mhm,
because I think most of us have survived the first wave, knowing that if you take the right precautions, you can prevent yourself from being
right,
infected.
right,
So I now know that I mean, we are all a lot more confident. Though of course, the confidence should not lead to carelessness is something which
yeah,
I think everybody keeps saying. But one could see that there is a lot more confidence in dealing with that. So I think vaccination, as well as an
right,
experience of having worked with COVID patients before, is a good thing. Whereas the numbers and the other thing,
yeah,
like I can imagine what the New Yorkers must have gone through, because we did read on social media and mainstream media how emotionally taxing it was for them.
yeah,
And we did, of course, go through that for a few weeks last time around. But this time
yeah.
it's hitting us harder, and I think we are now relieving that sensation of
Yeah.
what.
Yeah, and again, the scale in India is so massive, right? I mean, Philadelphia has 5 million folks. In terms of the number of hospitals that are in Philadelphia to take care of that 5 million folks, in terms of the ICU bed capacity, it's so much more massive. The number of elective surgeries that are done here that can be turned off, which then creates a massive capacity, is also pretty huge. So, but certainly, one of the interesting things about all of this, is that you always want to get a sense of, well, what should we have done different, right? And part of what we should have done different, or what we should do, I guess, even in real time, partly relates to, well, what's the worst case, right? Like, should we impinge on all these liberties that people feel are sacrosanct, right? And again, that's driven by worst case, right? I mean, I think people will think very differently if Ebola, right, with 50% mortality, not to minimize COVID, but Ebola is even worse. And you can imagine if Ebola suddenly became spread through the air, suddenly I think people would be a lot different about impinging on civil liberties if something like that is spreading and spreading furiously. Um, now, COVID, again, one had a. I think you're right. We had a general sense of complacency that developed since really New York, I guess, because New York was the last. It was Wuhan was crazy, Bergamo was crazy in Italy, New York
Bombardment.
was crazy, and then there was this general sense that we were now on top in some way. And India, is a really important thing, not just for India but also for the world, in terms of what one should do, um, in terms of representing worst case, because the worst case is exactly this, right? That mortality is driven not just by the virus, but by the inability to access, certain healthcare resources. So, given what given what you're going through, given what you're facing, what do you think? Do you think that the government entities or people, like, what should have happened differently? Would you say? There was, sorry for the long question, but there's been much made about the Kumbh Mela, for instance. There's been much made about political rallies. Do you think that those things should have been curtailed, and or do you think that it was fair for people to say, hey, I think we have kind of kept this at bay? I mean, the COVID cases have been flat from August through December, through January, through February. What should the signal have been? To say, hey, this is bad, and we need to take action X.
I think that's a very thoughtful question. It needs a deep dissection of the problem. The superficially, we have this the press and the social media pulling up the government and the decision to hold political rallies and Kumbh Mela and all that. It's fair, I suppose. But at the same time, for instance, if you look at Bangalore, there were no political rallies at all. And no one, Bangalore is not a place where too many people go to the Kumbh Mela. It's in Uttar Pradesh, as you know, and not too many people go from here. But even before April 1st, when the Kumbh Mela began, I think there were signs from late January, February that the cases are going to go up. So I think overall, it's a question of us being complacent, as you said. What happened in the first round when in 2020 was the government was very proactive. A lot of political leaders came on the national television, and there was a lot of propaganda about how we have to beat corona. A lot of stress on social distancing and masks and marshals going around, and I think there was a lot of supervision of what was going on. I wouldn't say enforcement, because I think enforcement was always difficult in this kind of a thing. But I think overall, because there was so much of talk about it, awareness remained high, and people were, whether they liked it or not, I think followed certain rules. But at some point of time, when, as you said, we thought that we got on top of it even without a vaccine, and everybody thought that we have an innate immunity, and Indians always believe that for various reasons that we are impervious to all of this, and we are invincible. And because of that, I think this false sense of security came in. Here, I think a couple of things went wrong. Definitely things like there were elections. Let me take this point straight on. Yeah. There is a large message against the ruling party in the center and the prime minister and all that. But at the same time, it is not that one party or one person could have been the culprit who has said that, okay, let's not worry about this. The elections were held in, let's say, the Maharashtra, the municipal elections were held. There were by-elections in many other states. There were regional parties involved. So I think overall, when it comes to political rallies, everybody is equally culpable. So I think there was this political expediency, because no one could have said that we may be looking at a second wave. Let's be careful. Let's not let up, and also let's build hospital infrastructure. Let's have more oxygen plants. Let's prepare for the next wave. And at the same time could have said, okay, let's gather for a political rally. So I think it was like either or situation. Therefore, I think political expediency did us in. So I think that was one part. Kumbh Mela is one place where too many people got together, definitely. But at the same time, if you look at religious gatherings, India is known for that, and it is across religions. I'm sure sermons happened in churches and parishes. The namazes happened in masjids. The Gurdwaras had a lot of getting together. It's not that it's one set of people who did that. Of course, there are some events which are extremely, concentrated number of people. But then I think all of us are equally culpable. At the same time, not just religious gatherings. We should have, noticed and prevented those wedding gatherings, birthday parties, restaurant, people going into nightclubs. It went on as if it was nobody's business. I know that in United States and in Europe, when there was a let up about all these things, there was still a lot of restrictions which people followed, and I think social distancing and at least some kind of semblance of discipline was there. In India, I'll tell you, I mean, I always give this example. If in the middle of the night, if you're driving and you come across a traffic stop, a red light, if no one is looking, you're going to drive through. So we are a society where we need enforcement. We need a policeman standing there at the corner to scare us into stopping and going. So unless somebody was actively policing us or actively stopping us from doing what we shouldn't be, this was the way it was going to be. So I think where we let up was that I'm sure all of us knew that there is a second wave coming, especially after what we saw in UK and then in France, etc. We should have been smart enough to understand that it is going to come around the corner. We should have let our political or religious or personal compulsions aside, and we should have prepared ourselves for this day. We shouldn't have been running out of beds. We shouldn't have been running out of oxygen. Last time when this happened, there were apartment complexes where the open places were prepared for any exigency. Beds were put up, oxygen cylinders were kept. In the beginning, we are talking in April, when the peak happened in August, September, October. But here, this is completely unawares and no one is prepared. So this wouldn't have happened if there was a solid messaging. And anybody who, kind of spoke about it was seen as a fearmonger and kind of cancelled or shut down on social media as well. So those, I think, there were political undertones, religious undertones to these kind of, messaging, or the people who countered these messages. So all of this is a very complex thing.
Yeah,
I think we should have anticipated this, planned a disaster management, and we shouldn't have been in this situation.
No, it's hard for anyone who's objective to kind of look at the situation and say that there's no effect of the restricted life that many of us have been living now for some time. So you're absolutely right. There is restaurants in the United States are still not at 100%. There's still there's still certainly things are not back to normal. And and then there's this constant burgeoning desire from the population to open up again, to be normal again, to take masks off, to etc. And I think you're saying what you're describing. It doesn't seem like there's any politician. I'll just say that given what was happening on the ground in terms of India opening up and everything, right? That it seemed like it would be incredibly politically unpopular for someone to come up and say, "Hey, we have to not, you can't do that, you can't do this." And I can't imagine what would happen if you started breaking up weddings in January, given what you're saying in terms of popular sentiment and the fact that people were being shut down who were saying that, hey, this could happen, something bad could happen again. So
yeah, I saw a tweet yesterday. I think one of your leading personalities who said, not a political personality, a doctor, who said that we are looking forward to a maskless society now that we are all vaccinated. I was laughing at that because I think that's. I know that I'm being an alarmist, but I think there is going to be a price to pay for that. And also, now a friend of mine who called me from UK said that UK has opened up and Scotland is opening up from tomorrow. And we know what happened to the kind
Yeah.
of crowds that thronged the
Yeah.
shops in December
Right.
in UK, and
Yeah.
how they came up. So,
Right.
and we know that half the population of UK is still not vaccinated. And I know how, people from United States
Yeah.
and United Kingdom love liberty and
Yeah.
not being strained by masks.
Yeah.
And I think that, like in France,
Yeah.
we may look at another wave over there. I dread that, and I hope it doesn't happen. But this is a lesson for us to learn. While
Yeah.
we might want freedom for ourselves, but I think we have to look at a larger society around us. And I know that it's as you said, it's very unpopular to say. I sometimes in end of January or so, I tweeted saying that things are not looking good. And in
Yeah.
some private circles, when I said I only hope that we'll never come to the stage of lockdown, people laughed at me
Yeah.
saying that we can't afford another lockdown. And
Yeah.
here, my state government has announced lockdown for 50 days tomorrow.
Yeah,
On-
yeah, it's such a tough situation. So, but no, you're exactly right. So, I think it's an important caution to see what's happening in India in terms of what happens when societies completely open up. Now, again, hope will spring eternal among those who want liberty. So, the hope, and I think it's okay for societies to do that, because just my little philosophical tangent. It's like, if the only hope for effectively controlling pandemics is communism, then do we want do we want do we want
pandemic.
do we want that to be the sole goal of society? But no, but then there's a cost. Then, as you're saying, there's a cost to pay. There's a cost to pay, and you have
I
to.
think we should be prepared for this.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
saying that we should be a totalitarian society or
yeah, yeah,
authority society,
yeah,
but I'm saying this, that
yeah,
having foreseen that,
yeah,
when we opened up, we are
yeah,
going to have these issues. I think there should have been messaging. There
yeah,
should have been preparation on the
yeah,
ground to handle the kind of crowds
yeah.
which we are going to see in the hospitals. So
Right.
that becomes the problem. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you will probably not have this situation where, if God forbid
yeah,
the pandemic were to go out of hands in
yeah,
any part of the country, in your
yeah.
country, you will run out of beds. You said that you have a huge buffer to
Right.
deal with it. So even though your normal life may be affected a little, but you won't
Yeah.
probably lose someone because you couldn't get into a hospital.
Right.
So we should have foreseen that. So I'm not an advocate of
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
lockdown at all, but at the same time, I think if we decide that we are going to have a certain kind of a lifestyle,
Yeah.
if we are going to have autobahns in the middle of Bangalore,
Yeah.
we should have enough, first aid centers and trauma
Yeah.
centers on the road. So that's as simple
Yeah.
as that.
Yeah. No, yeah. No, I think it's important to be honest with the populace, right? People have to understand that, okay, you want to live an unrestricted life. Understand that, things can get very, very bad. And it's not to minimize the fact. I mean, it's a huge thing when something like what happened in New York happens. So you don't want to, you just have to be honest with the populace that, hey, this is a potential bad thing. And India has shown us that, unfortunately, after a year of going through this, hey, look, you can still have a worst case scenario. So the hope is, again, for those of us who are trying to look for any streams of optimism, that the vaccination rates will be enough, and that plus natural immunity will be enough to allow for some semblance of return to normality.
What is the word from your streets? The vaccination works, because we believe
Yeah.
the number of infections among vaccinees has come down.
Yeah.
We see very few number of patients who are in critical care
Yeah.
after both doses of
Yeah.
vaccination. The infection seems to be less.
Yeah.
At least among healthcare professionals, we used to hear,
Yeah.
a friend there, a friend here. This time we didn't hear much. So
Yeah.
what's your opinion
No,
on
I
it?
mean, that's the belief is that the vaccines are, I mean, yeah, that's the word. The word on the street is the vaccines are incredibly effective at preventing severe illness. They're also very, very effective at preventing sickness in general. So they're not. I don't know how effective. I mean, the studies show they're effective at reducing positive RT-PCR as well. So one would hope that translates into reducing risk of transmission as well. That's a somewhat of a hot debate, which leads to the whole masking thing, right? It's like, well, if the
Yeah.
60% of the population is masked, or sorry, 60% of the population is vaccinated in some quarters, why do we need masks? Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But it brings me to the important point here. Do you think it would have been possible to vaccinate a significant portion of the Indian populace? And I think, in my reading, in my gathering from reading from, January, December, etc. tweets, again, I think India may have been hurt by this idea that there was something innate about Indians that was preventing this, and we don't need the vaccine. So would you say that vaccine hesitancy in India was a significant problem?
Well, the first part of that Indians somehow believe that we are immune to this because of our natural immunity, because of various foodstuffs we eat, like turmeric. So I think that myth was, kind of shattered right in the beginning of the pandemic last year. I don't think a reasonable number of, at least reasonable people, believed that anymore. So that myth might have, kind of prevailed amongst certain sections of the society, but most of the people didn't want that. I think the problem about the vaccination was we kind of probably overestimated our capacity to manufacture the vaccine. So that, I think, was an issue. I don't think it was a bad idea to export vaccine, because if you look at the total number of vaccine doses which were given away to various countries which needed them. Some people call it as vaccine diplomacy, and some people call it as humanitarian aid. I don't think that 70, 80 million doses of vaccine would have really made a big difference for this huge population. We have 1 billion vaccine eligible people above 18 years, and our vaccine manufacturing capacity is something like, at best, 2.5 million doses per month. So you are looking at what, 60 million doses in a year.
Yeah.
And there's a huge gap to bridge.
So
I believe, I believe we kind of should have done our math a little better, and maybe allowed the vaccines from outside. Things like, for example, I could afford to have my own vaccine. And I'm very happy to have had the vaccine which is made in India, as patriotism goes. But then it is possible that I could have kind of allowed my dose to be given to somebody who couldn't have afforded a vaccine which was like, we obtained from another country. So if there were vaccines available which are effective, which we could have imported, I think we could have had a larger number of patients who were vaccinated. So that, I think, maybe one of the miscalculations.
So the issue with vaccination for India is completely, you think, is almost entirely related to just not enough vaccine, very little to do with vaccine hesitancy among getting the population. There weren't, here we have a reasonable segment of the population that feels that the vaccine will do, bad things, etc. That is not the case in India, would you say? Or I mean, not in a significant way?
Not in a significant way, I would say, because I know the WhatsApp group messages, the clots from vaccines and all these things actually percolated into our homes through various social media. So there was some kind of resistance to it, but I think that unlike the anti-vaxxer sentiments in the West, I don't think it is such a big deal here, because people took vaccines on in public view. Most of us doctors took vaccines and put our pictures, knowing that would encourage others to take. These kind of things did help. I think there was a small segment of people who were hesitant to take vaccine. More than that, it was a problem, no doubt. But I think there's a large segment of population which wants to take the vaccine. For instance, there are a lot of people who have received their first doses and haven't got the second doses yet. So there is a short supply. So I think numbers, logistics, the mathematics, I think is a bigger problem.
I see. So perhaps India should have imported, but again, why not? Why wasn't there wasn't this big important emergency imperative to vaccinate as much of the city population as possible, right? Right. I mean, you would think that vaccines. When was the COVID? So the just to review, the COVID shield. I'm getting them wrong.
The
COVID
Astra,
shield is the AstraZeneca. Covaxin is the from the Bharat.
Covaxin is the Serum Institute. Yeah.
Right. They're both the inactivated version of the virus, so they both have a protein thing. There are no messenger RNA. There's no
No.
mRNA vaccine available in India yet.
No mRNA vaccine available. Covishield is a live attenuated
Live
avian
attenuated, okay.
vaccine. It
Okay.
has the spike proteins,
Okay.
whereas the Covaxin is the entire virion, which is inactivated. So
Okay.
they're two different vaccines, but we don't have an mRNA
Okay.
vaccine. So I guess we have now approved the Sputnik vaccine from Russia, even though I think some bridging studies have to be completed in India. But then last week we have already approved that. So I guess we should have gone for numbers. I know that, or alternatively, knowing that there is going to be a huge demand and knowing the capacity of the existing vaccine manufacturing plants or facilities, whatever you call, we should have kind of commissioned a few more. I do not know. I think there are logistics. It's not that you can put it up in a month or so. I think it takes some time for you to do that. But I suppose we could have. Of course, we could have. Definitely, we would have been happy to use up a few vaccines from the United States.
So that brings up my next thing. My goodness, we had Kamala Harris, who was proclaiming Indian roots, and then when it comes time for when India is going through this,
she said she is a black, isn't it? I'm sorry, I have to bring up. It's only once or twice I think she made those idli remarks and all that.
It seems it's she's a politician, so I guess I shouldn't be too harsh on things. It's so hard not to call it out when that was one of the things. I mean, one of the things that was brought up was that that this is she's of Indian origin and roots and stuff, but yet very silent in terms of what's been happening here. And it took 2 or 3 days, which was pretty embarrassing for all of us that are the Indian diaspora.
I saw a lot of people like yourself and a lot of people on Twitter, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, made a lot of noise and said that shameful. We have an equivalent to the Vice President of the United States here. So we have a whole set of media personalities who bay after the ruling party or doctors for whatever goes wrong. But at this particular point of time, when there was this US sitting on a stockpile of AstraZeneca vaccine, or the guy coming on television and saying that we are not going to export the components for manufacturing vaccines, there was radio silence on that front as well. So we have an equivalent there. I think all of them are politicians, so I suppose we can forgive.
It's interesting. It's interesting though. It's almost like you need Donald Trump as president for the media to care about India. I mean, I cannot imagine the type of media coverage that would have happened, the type of stuff that
I tweeted this. I think there is a significant number of people, both this side of Atlantic and that side, looking for a change of leadership in this country, because it looked as if that we are not. I mean, at least we felt this. I'm not sure if I'm right in saying that. It looked as if that if a particular party or a particular person was not in power in India, this would have been probably more easily forthcoming. So that's how it was being made to feel. So I think these are political decisions. I'm sure they have their own
but
reasons.
That's the thing. Politicians, unfortunately, a lot of them are not independent-minded. Politicians are about strong horses, weak horses. They want to go with the prevailing winds, right? And so part of the job of the media, that fourth estate, etc., is to represent and ask them the hard questions. And when you live in this and when you don't have that pressure being applied, then I think you end up seeing things like this, right? So you end up seeing what happened, which was, suddenly, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are supposed to be global, etc., care about this and that, where the former Republicans don't care, etc. Suddenly you had this massive catastrophe happening in India,
And
and
how could
and
they,
how
yeah.
and how could they say, and in the kind of thoughtless and statements. I mean, first of all, they didn't make a statement for 3 days, and it was only after some hangama on I'm sure social media, which filtered into what they said, that they finally said something yesterday saying that they are going to supply raw vaccine, raw components to build the vaccine and stuff. And also, it's so crazy to be on Twitter. To the biggest debate here in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks has been AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, and this risk of this rare blood clot, cerebrovenous sinus thrombosis that's related to thrombocytopenia, this vaccine-mediated immune thrombocytopenia thrombosis. And that's been the big debate, and the risk. Do we want to be vaccinating the 18 to 50-year-old women with this vaccine because of a 1 in 100,000, etc. Rate of complications? So, and of course, here we have the embarrassing, not embarrassing, but we have the choice and the privilege of having multiple different vaccines available. And so, it seems hard given what the debate is. I mean, I've had multiple folks from all different rungs of the socioeconomic ladder who I mention vaccines, and they say, "Oh, I'm not getting that Johnson and Johnson one. Oh, I'm not getting that other one. AstraZeneca isn't even approved, and we're sitting on millions of doses." So it boggles the mind that that with what's happening, with the news coming out of India, the pictures and stuff, that we would not rush vaccines there. Of course, as you also may have seen, the CDC director apparently does not, here in the US, does not seem to think that vaccine surges to areas of hotspots are an appropriate strategy, which is also kind of somewhat mind-boggling, because this thing works pretty in within 7 days you start to see the curves spreading, and you're talking about a peak, right? What are you talking about a peak? You're talking, it's April right now, you're still talking about a peak in 2 weeks or something like that, right? Given what's happening and stuff. So
I saw Dr. Vinay Prasad tweeting that the graph where the was separated at 7 days.
Yeah.
And I mean, what you said was really amazing, that you are likely not use this entire stockpile of AstraZeneca vaccine at all.
Yeah.
Yet, it reminds me of those days when wheat was thrown into the Atlantic just to stabilize prices.
Yeah.
So when millions in Africa or Asia were dying of famines.
Yeah.
So I think I do understand that political expediency or compulsions are important. I know that the politicians themselves don't think by themselves, and there are people pulling the strings. I do understand that, but it gives a very fair, kind of a unpleasant feeling that there is a larger plan to this whole thing. Anyway, I think we should not go there. We are
right. Yeah,
at least I don't think we should go there. But this was unfortunate. The components, these are basically some tubes and single-use tubes and all those. So even if they arrive, they are not going to ramp up our production. They are only going to make sure that we still have those 2.5-3 million doses of vaccine in a month. We still have a huge gap in getting the vaccine. So I guess there may be a commercial call there as well. So it may force that we may have to buy the single dose vaccine or those kind of things. So I think we do have to, until the time when we can vaccinate a significant number of people, I think we have to go back to the clock goes back now. We have to start with lockdowns and restricted movements and then masks, and it's very unpleasant because you know what it did to our Indian economy, the poorer people, the food availability.
Here's the question for you, Venkatesh. When these things are spreading like wildfire, and I mean, clearly nobody is running around right now saying, "Hey, let's go have a wedding party," right? I mean, even if the government,
you mean not in the open?
Really? Still, even now.
Yesterday, I got a call from someone who shared a few reports, and then I realized that a group of people whom I know very well was sitting around, and I don't know, they may have been having a drink or maybe they are at dinner. They are talking about another friend who actually is down with COVID. So I said, why are you sitting there together?
Yeah.
Some 9 people. So on the sly, I said that if you're not looking, we go through the red
Okay.
light.
That defeats
So
my
your
that defeats
question.
my it defeats my thesis. It deflates my thesis. I was going to say that that when things are when you know the populations respond to signals, and of course one of the things you have to respond to is when the government mandates something. But the other thing that you respond to is your hospitals being full and not having an available bed, and you know the kind of fear that permeates there, and that I would be surprised if in any of these places. Now it may be too late, but I'd be surprised if by the time that the state puts some lockdown in place, that everyone is so scared of stepping outside that they would themselves not be restricting themselves and not going out to dinner and not doing these various things.
I don't know. Human
Yeah.
nature must be funny because in 2020, a lot of
Yeah.
senior politicians were afflicted with
Yeah.
COVID here in India.
Yeah.
But yet, their other colleagues did have their birthday bashes, their daughters' weddings. They went to temples in hordes. That happened during the peak of this thing. Now, what I see is there are families who lost people last time around are now not taking the same precautions. So how how much can this not affect you? I think it's a mindset issue. I don't think it is as simple as like, you know, people around you are doing this, therefore we should. I mean, everybody knows that you have to wear a mask. If you don't like wearing a mask, don't wear it. But if you say that, okay, I'm going to wear it, but on my forehead or on my chin, so that basically says that you are not really scared. You are just doing it because it's some kind of a formality, or you know, you are not allowed into a store or a restaurant without the mask, and that's why you're carrying it around in a convenient place. I think people just don't understand, which is where I think I see a big zero on the China's map. There are cases at all. I don't know whether it is true or not. But I wouldn't be surprised that if somebody is punished severely for not following these things, and that's why they were able to completely eradicate that. I don't know. I think there was a time in 25 years ago, we always used to say that we need a military dictatorship in this country because we are not a disciplined lot. And I think nothing tells us that may have been true than this pandemic and the behavior of people.
Well, luckily Michel Accard is not on the this podcast. He would have a seizure if you said that. But anyway, I appreciate the moments of light humor. It's really watching the scenes from India really grim, and I hope the healthcare workers like you who are kind of on the front lines. I hope you emotionally will stay strong, and all I can say is that this will end, and things will start to get better, and I hope that everyone will stay safe, and I hope that the messaging that folks like you and other responsible people are doing in terms of what individual actions you can take to prevent yourself and therefore prevent spread in the community. I hope people listen. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Ramesh. I think my country needs best wishes of people like yourself. I think we need to be strong, as you said, before the healthcare workers lose their morale and we have more devastation on the street. I think we need a lot of prayers. Thank you for having me here, and it was actually revealing to me as well that people like you care so much about us, and I've seen your tweets about how the US government's response to our crisis and was, and many of your friends. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. Thanks so much. All right. Take care.